The only issue, I guess, that some fans and maybe some media are going to have is that the Pittsburgh Steelers scored 1 touchdown, 16 points total. I mean, does that bother you at all? Do you look at the 16 points and have any issue with it?
I mean, my only issue with it is that there was at least, 10 points that they left on the board.
Yeah.
The drop touchdown for Deontay, I kind of thought even in like real time that should have been a touchdown.
That was a touchdown.
I don't really,
yeah, I agree.
But whatever. And then, if Jaylen Warren doesn't fumble, I mean, I feel like that's at least 3 more points that they can put on the board. So yeah, it's frustrating to leave those points on the field, but how many times this year did you feel like the Steelers even left points on the field? Like, it's just, for the most part, it was just a 3 and out where they weren't even in position to score. So I am much more encouraged. I don't really take much of an issue with the 16 points beyond that, especially because they were in control of the game. It felt like the entire time. I mean, a point to time of possession, but it also just felt like, I mean, they won time of possession like 37 minutes to 22 or something like that. They were just controlling the clock the entire game. They were getting what they wanted to. They were moving the sticks. They possessed the ball. I mean, that's the stuff that gives you confidence, I think, especially, when you think about how close they were to, getting maybe to 26 points or 25 or something like that. Like you're much more encouraged about the direction of the offense based on that stuff than you are worried about, oh, well, they only scored 16 points. I mean, to win and then still have room for improvement and for that room for improvement to be, I don't know, like small, like, it doesn't feel like they were far off from a game that really got you really excited.
Yeah, I like that's such a good way to put it. Is how many games this season, how many times in general, the answer might be 0 that the Pittsburgh Steelers left points on the board, like that's or on the field, like that's crazy. Last week it was like is a 57-yard field goal in Cleveland leaving 3 points on the board. This week it's
right.
Yeah, well, they probably could have scored 10 more if they didn't have a turnover, if the refs kind of called a touchdown in their favor, which they kind of might have got back with the Darnell Washington thing, but it's a whole other debate I'm not going to touch. But I agree, like it's such a good starting place, like to score 16 points. Not the greatest score in the world, but who cares? You walked away with a win. Your offense looks good. And like the grand scheme of it is, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 3 days into this, 4 days into this. They've had 3 practices, a walkthrough on Saturday, and then they played a game on Sunday. They didn't have training camp to adjust to a new offensive coordinator. They didn't have OTAs and the preseason. Eddie Faulkner walked in the door on Tuesday morning, found out he was the new offensive coordinator. He had Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to practice. And then Saturday they did a walkthrough, and Sunday he's in Cincinnati, which is not an easy place to play, trying to play a game with a play caller that's not him. Like he had to bring everybody together, get on the same page as the guy who's going to call the plays on Sunday, because that's not going to be him, and put a team together in 4 days, 5 days. Like, I mean, that's a great launching pad. That's exactly where you want to start. If they lost, then you're like, okay, there's so many improvements. But to sit here and go, they snapped a 400-yard streak that they have been waiting 3 years to break in one game. That's a plus. That's awesome. Kenny Pickett looks like a brand new quarterback. That's a plus. Najee Harris is seemingly back and alive. That's a plus. Pat Freiermuth is finally here. Awesome. 16 points. Not bothered by it. Not bothered by it at all. I look at it like, if this is what you could do in 5 days, I'm very excited to see what the Pittsburgh Steelers can do in 6 weeks, because at that point, they've had enough time to figure this out. And like, that's the biggest thing, is just to go straight back to the beginning here. Like you said, it wasn't a bunch of schematical changes. It wasn't a bunch of, we're doing this different, or this is a new playbook or whatever. No, the Cincinnati Bengals said it after the game. This is pretty much the same thing that they've been running all season. So it's not like they like put in this big surprise offense and it just like surprised the Bengals and they didn't see it coming, and then boom, it worked. Like, no, this is the same offense that they've been running. They just ran it more efficiently, and they did it in 5 days. Like, that's the best place to be. Not bothered by it whatsoever. There is one thing. I guess before we get to the negatives, I want your thoughts on Kenny Pickett. Is Kenny Pickett, you leaving that game? I'm not even going to ask a question. Were you leaving that game? What are your thoughts on Kenny Pickett right now?
Well, I'm much more confident in who he can be at least through the end of the season. I thought his play on third down was like pretty telling, you know? Like I
Yeah.
mean, Kenny's a guy who's always kind of shows up in those clutch moments, but like they put the ball a lot in his hands in big situations, and
Yeah.
just multiple times we've seen Kenny kind of wilt in those situations this year. Like not the, fourth quarter drives or anything, but those big down, like drive to drive downs,
Yeah.
those third downs where you can either stay on the field, sustain a drive, maybe, get into field goal range or something like that, versus just handing the ball back to the other team after a 3-and-out. He did the former. He kept the offense on the field with his arm. He moved the sticks with his arm. It was him, not Jalen or Najee Harris making incredible runs. That kept the Steelers like on the field and kept that offense moving and kept them moving forward. I thought especially later in the second half, like that bomb he threw to what's his face, George Pickens, down
Yeah.
the sideline. It was like 40 yards, just kind of like balls to the wall a little bit, like making a big play in a big moment, and like Jalen said, taking some risks. Like they trusted him to take risks, and Kenny rewarded them with some accurate passing and some big plays. So that's really got me excited about what Kenny can be down the back half of this season.
Yeah, I agree. Like I watched him yesterday, and at no moment did I think, oh, Kenny's having like a career game, and we even checked the stats before we came on here to say like, oh, where does this compare, in the grand scheme of every Kenny Pickett performance. And it sits near the top, but like he didn't throw a touchdown. This wasn't like a 400-yard game for Kenny Pickett through the air. It was a good average day for a quarterback who probably could have thrown a touchdown pass, but probably also had a touchdown pass taken away from him. I looked at it and just said, this is the first time from the first pass in the game until the last pass of the game, there was not a lull in Kenny Pickett's play. This was the first time ever in Kenny Pickett's NFL career that there was not a gap between good Kenny and good Kenny. It was just good Kenny entire time, start to finish. You weren't looking for some splash. You weren't looking for, and I think that was the biggest thing, is you weren't waiting for fourth quarter Kenny. You weren't waiting for these crucial moments. You were just like, look at the Steelers have control of this football game because their quarterback is playing well. Like their quarterback is keeping them in control of this football game. You could call that game management. You could call that, newfound confidence. I don't know, but I just looked at it and said, this is the first time in Kenny Pickett's career there's not a gap between the first drive and the last drive where it's just a bunch of, oh my gosh, what is happening, and frustration. It's just a complete game of, if you forgot Kenny Pickett was out there, you like, that's how good he was, is that you like at times weren't thinking, is Kenny Pickett having a good game or a bad game? You were just like, this is just a good offense. This is a good, smooth offense that obviously has their hiccups still, but like for the most part looked real good. So, just if I'm walking away from this and I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, anybody who was sitting there on Saturday night thinking, man, I hope that we didn't make a mistake. I hope this wasn't Kenny Pickett. It wasn't. It was whatever the chicken and the egg, whatever Matt Canada was. It was Matt Canada. And from here, maybe Kenny isn't the greatest quarterback of all time, but I mean, if you were to ask me today, if you were to ask me 48 hours ago if the Pittsburgh Steelers should go draft a quarterback or sign a quarterback or whatever in free agency, I'd say, yeah, 100%. There's zero question to that. And if you ask me today, I'd say, let's just give it some time, see what happens. And I think that jump is very significant